Hello, this is Arcurus, and this video is going to be a little bit different than everything else on the channel. I am a tabletop games enthusiast. My game of choice is Pathfinder role-playing game, first edition. The reason why that is because when I started playing tabletop RPGs, I started playing in the Dungeons & Dragons 3.0, 3.5 era, and a lot of my best memories from high school are actually hanging out with my friends playing D&D, and all of my closest tight-knit friend group actually comes from that. So I've basically had a relatively stable D&D group throughout the years, but as Dungeons and Dragons, and I will call it D&D because to me all tabletop role-playing is kind of D&D. It just depends on the system you play because we all have the same goals. Cooperative storytelling. It's just the mechanics behind how we do that differs from system to system, and I'm glad that there are as many systems out there to fit as many styles and choices as a player or game master, dungeon master can have. But I'm going to shorthand and call it D&D because to me, Pathfinder First Edition is exactly the same as 3.5 D&D. Now, we moved over to Pathfinder when 4th edition D&D came out. I actually did get a core set of books for 4th edition, and I wasn't thrilled with what I saw. I really didn't like a way a lot of the mechanics worked, and creating a first level character in that game was kind of a headache for me. A lot of people would say that 3rd edition D&D and Pathfinder is really complicated, but 4th edition just didn't make sense at all to me. I did check out 5th edition when it first came out, and my opinions on 5th edition is that whereas it's really good for a storyteller DM, character choice suffers in the way you can build your characters. It's a lot harder to differentiate one ranger mechanically from another ranger beyond your subclass. And because there aren't very many subclasses, and then it relies a lot upon homebrew, and we're going to talk about homebrew as we go through this whole thing. But Matt, what is this video? Well, this video here is, I'm planning on creating a Westmarches game for Pathfinder First Edition, and although my friend and DM for me, Ghost LPs, has already created such a system, and we've played in it a little bit, it doesn't scratch exactly what I want in a Westmarches game. So I'm going to go ahead and create one here, and also, go through how I'm starting it from the beginning. So now that we've gone through all that, well, let's start. So I feel like some of the best place to start, especially when starting a campaign and treating a Westmarches game very similarly, is as a DM I'm going to make an intent and wishlist document, and this is going to help be my centralizing document for what I want to put in the game, what I don't want in the game, to help keep me on the straight and narrow. So back when Pathfinder first came out, one of the first campaigns I ever DM'd was a Kingmaker campaign. And something that the Kingmaker campaign and a traditional Westmarches game have in common is a reliance on the hex crawl. So I'll put that right in there. So for those who don't know, a Westmarches game is a style of tabletop RPG campaign in which you have a ton of players. Like the original document that I can trace that came up with this is like 10 to 16. Now that's not 10 to 16 players all at one table, it's just 10 to 16 it's a pool of players. And part of how the hex crawl goes is there's an area of the map for exploration. There's a town that is always safe. In fact, it highly, highly discourages having any adventure in town. And the farther you go west out of the town, the more difficult encounters get and that sort of thing, and you put stuff out there for adventure. And the going east, well, the only way you don't go east. If you go east, your character retires. So the town is supposed to be, out on the edge of the wilderness, and the players are adventuring into the wilderness. Now, the Westmarches campaign abandons any sort of centralized plot. That doesn't mean it can't have one, but there's no week-to-week follow the story type stuff. If there is a plot, it has to be, or it doesn't have to be, but if there is a plot, it's something that the players put together themselves. It relies on a hex crawl to measure distance going out from the town, that sort of thing. And another big part of it is that in an adventuring party, there are 4 slots, and the players, they're like, we are going to, there's these several different adventures that are out there, and players will slot themselves into those adventures, and when an adventure is full, according to that group, then that gets scheduled. So it takes the schedule away from we play D&D every Thursday. It's hey, we all have time this day, let's get together and do this. And the adventure that they run should not run more than that single session. So a session should begin and end in the safe town. So that's kind of explaining a Westmarches game. So things I notice is that the hex crawl is really important. And something that I remember going over really well with my players was the hex crawling during the Kingmaker adventure path for Pathfinder 1st Edition. So what I want is the exploration rules from Kingmaker for the hex crawl. Now, those rules did get updated into the Ultimate campaign. Which was a source book released later by Paizo. So all that got updated, and so I really want to use those exploration rules. Excuse me for clearing my throat and that sort of thing. My sinuses have been acting up and my allergies. So I really want to use those. I want there to be a focus on exploration. I want there to be a focus on exploration and survival in the early stages. Now, I've talked to the survival mechanics with Ghost LPs and a couple of my players. I've talked about those quite a bit because I want those to kind of matter more. I want exploration and travel to matter more in my games. And, well, the thing that always comes up is, as the players get magic or access to magic items, that goes away. And actually, I agree with that. I agree with that entirely. So, in the early game, survival should matter more, and it should taper off as the players utilize magic to limit those. So, as the players get higher level, they get access to more magic, such as create food, create water. Clerics have that as a 0 level spell. Okay, so now the party doesn't have to worry about water. But a 0 level spell of the cleric is dedicated to that spell instead of another spell. It's the same with purify food and water, or create food, or endure elements, all that sort of thing. Once you start getting into that, at the early levels where, those spell slots are critical, and it's a real choice between, do I prepare the survival spells, or do I prepare the combat spells, or the social spells? Or do I mix and match all of that and be a jack of all trades but master of none? I feel like those are actually, for those types of characters, really, really good choices for those characters to make. But as they level up and those spell slots become less important, like a 1st level spell slot, 2nd level spell slot, then once again, basically you're negating those explore those survival challenges. And you know what? I'm fine with that. Like, as the characters get higher level, they shouldn't have to worry about, like, finding food or that sort of thing. They have bigger things to worry about, so that's fine. So, for the exploration rules and the survival rules, okay, where am I going to find those? Well, I'm going to find those rules in Ultimate Campaign and the core rulebook. There's probably a couple other splat books that Paizo put out that I could probably search through. I'll have to scroll through the archives of Nethys to find those things. That's the official online archive for all of Paizo's rules and that sort of thing. So I'll have to troll through that to find them. But let's go to Ultimate Campaign and let's take a look at those exploration rules. So if we go to Campaign Systems and Exploration. So here we go. Here are those rules. It's quite a bit. So it goes from 154 to 159, which is 5 pages, which it includes some hazards down here. And hazards like bad weather, like, I don't really count that as a hazard insofar as like an encounter goes, which is how they do it, mess with it here. And also, when I go through some of these, especially when it starts explaining terrain types, I am noticing that the terrain types are different. So we have forest, hill, marsh, mountain, plain, settlement, water. I notice those are different than the terrain types, say, that are presented in the Ranger class. Because in Pathfinder, Rangers not only have favored enemies, they have favored terrains. So we have cold, desert, forest, jungle, mountain, plains, like other than the material one, swamp, underground, urban, and water. So those are different, and then those are even different again from like the environments that creatures are listed at in the bestiaries. So this is where my comments on homebrew come through. I've always been kind of a rules as written kind of person. Not so much rules lawyery, but, you know, keep to the spirit of the rules, that sort of thing. And sometimes people come up with homebrew stuff that is way outside the intent of the rules. But I feel like a little bit of homebrew here to make everything become cohesive insofar as rules go. So I'm going to come over here in a Teton wish list. So we need to unify the terrain types. Ranger favored terrains. Hex types and bestiary and environments. So that's something we're going to have to do, I believe, to use these rules, because like a game system, to me what determines a game is that it's a number of rule sets that are all interconnected and working together, and then there's bolt-on rules to the games, so like expansions. And I really like it when expansions also weave together. And so when I notice things like the Ranger favored terrains are different from the Hex types, and again are different from the bestiary environments, which are in Bestiary 1, which is kind of a weakness of the Pathfinder system to begin with, I believe that we can weave all of these together just by defining the environments better. And if I can use these core rulebook and Bestiary 1 environments, and then change the Hex types to that, that would be preferable. So we're still in the we're looking at the rules for the first, not for the first time. I have looked through this quite a bit. So if I go through these rules here, so I'm just fine with the travel time and the exploration time. All that's good. That stuff works. Tracking travel, that stuff works. So if we go to this map here, a blank terrain map's going to have like a little square here, and you press an X, you put an X in that to determine what that terrain, if you've explored it already. So that's fine. So far all of this is as I expect for and as I remember from the Pathfinder rules. So this little bit here, the typical wilderness hex is trackless. So if I see that, if I go to that in the core rulebook, so that's page 172. So let's see, that has to do with all these movement and distance. That has to do with all this stuff here. And the thing is that because we're going to be using the hex system in Ultimate Campaign for our travel time, that supersedes all this stuff. So we can actually ignore this when we port all these rules over. Exploration rewards, actually, because it's going to be a Westmarches game, and I might change the way XP is doled out or the way it's done, is I'm actually going to cut out the exploration rewards. The reward for exploring the hex is going to be that you find like a hidden site or something hidden in that hex, that sort of thing. There's this nice part here about keeping things interesting. Things found by the roadside, scenic spots, game mastery guide. This is basically linking to a couple of tables that are in the game mastery guide. And I might utilize those tables. I might utilize different tables to try and keep it interesting, because in a hex crawl, sometimes you don't want every hex to have you don't want the vast majority of hexes to have nothing that basically makes them empty. You always want them to have something, is how it goes. And so then it has the getting lost rules here. That's a good thing. Like, if we're using a hex map, then that means we're tracking where the players are on the map. Usually when I do travel in my games, I usually say like, you guys are on the road and doing something. We don't do the getting lost stuff, generally, but I would like to include those rules. So include getting lost rules. Okay, that would be cool. Alright, and here it talks about random encounters. So this is the base random encounter. This is the base random encounter, like what you roll for this exploration system. So it could be no encounter, 50% chance. There's a 10% chance of the encounter being a hazard, and then there's a 40% chance of the encounter being a monster. Whereas I like the idea of the hazard system, because I've looked through this before. It's all the way down here. So, something like blight, whether from lack of water, plague, or hostile magic, the plants and wildlife in the hex are suffering. The blight affects the hex and all adjacent unexplored hexes, and lasts for 1d4 plus 2 weeks. During a blight, survival DCs to get along in the wild increase by 5. That's kind of cool, but like there's other things in here, but like these are all like temporary that like apply to the hex, and I'm not really sure if I want to do hazards like that. So in the original Pathfinder Kingmaker, it was just a 50% chance of a monster to get a random encounter. So planned encounters are going to be in all of the stuff that I put on the map. So there will be planned encounters. I'm going to go over those like later, but like there's like a bear, like a wolf's den or something, or a cave with a bear in it, stuff like that. So that's going to be something that's planned later. So let's see, and then we're going to have the hex terrains. So these are all the different terrains, and these include things like, so you have your base desert terrain here, right? And then you can roll a modifier on that hex to make it more difficult, which does something to make it have a specific feature. It could be a hunting ground for a specific or bunch of creatures, which modifies the chance of encounters in that hex. It could contain a resource, and a resource might be useful in helping develop the town, because a really cool idea that I saw that Ghost LP's had in his Westmarches campaign is the ability to upgrade stuff in the town. And maybe instead of, having, applying straight gold to upgrade the town, maybe the players have to go find and secure a resource of some sort. And then the last one would be like a secret. A secret is something you have to roll for to find. And all of these contain examples of those for each of these different types. I mean, we'll exclude settlement because we're not going to be doing any... We're not going to have a settlement terrain, and we're not going to be adventuring in an urban setting. So then it goes into a cool way to do random map generation, and that might be interesting to try. I might do like a video like trying that to see if we can generate a cool map for our game. And then the last thing it has here is it's got all the different hazards and where they could be. And I like the idea of some of this stuff, but you could put a lot of this into a table that you can roll. And I'm not really sure about the modifiers to the hexes, because when you talk about a hex map, and let's go to the hex map they actually have here, you start talking about, like, this is a really small area. This is about a third-ish or less of actually one of the maps from Pathfinder Kingmaker. So when you start talking about players are in a town maybe here, and then they go out here to go to some ruins there, and then once they really start going out, like let's say this deep forest out here is like where the high level stuff is, you start have to now like, okay, they moved into this hex, that one's difficult, it slows them down, they move into this hex, up, there's more monsters here, and you have to basically, on the DM side of things, put that on every hex, or they have to put that on their hex map, and these cells aren't that big on the hex map for a ton of information, plus like drawing a basic map in there. So that could get really fiddly, so I'm not sure if I would use that system. So let's go take a look at the getting lost rules in the core rulebook. So it would probably be in environmental rules maybe? Nope. Wilderness? Yep, there it is. Let's see, if we look here, it defines on under what circumstances will cause the players to get lost. and then, and then they roll to see if they become lost. And what DC that is dependent on what type of terrain they're in. And then there's a modifier they can get. So if the players have navigational tools, if they have a map of the area along with a sextant is a tool that helps you measure distances on a map, then they would get a +4 modifier on the check. So, but then if there's poor visibility, and poor visibility usually is what causes you to get lost, then if they had the proper navigational tools, that would cancel out. Then it has the effects of being lost, and it talks about how, like, during each hour of overland travel, I might change that to each hex of overland movement, because we're using the hexes to track where the party is, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I would probably lift this almost unchanged. And remember, we're making changes for the 100%, to make everything work together and be cohesive. So I guess that's something we could put here. Homebrew changes to oh man, I lost my train of thought there, but we're going to be making homebrew changes to mesh the rules better. That's what we'll put. Use hex as movement rather than time. Okay. So now that we kind of have, how our players are going to go about the map, what we need to do to make like all of that work is because we're going to focus on exploration and survival. So we got the exploration part. Let's get the survival part. So, what rules affect survival? Okay, so we have encounters with monsters and animals. Okay, the weather. The weather should affect, how our characters go. Food and water. Environmental hazards. And those could be like, earthquake, storms, so all of this is kind of interconnected, which I like. So those all can affect survival, and something that affects survival, players should be able to mitigate with proper preparation. That's key. If it can't be overcome by proper preparation, it needs to go. So, what systems will determine each of these? So, weather has a really good system in Ultimate Wilderness. In fact, we're going to get a lot of really good systems out of Ultimate Wilderness, simply because, as one of the last books to come out for Pathfinder 1st Edition, by the time this came out, I believe, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they were on the cusp of releasing second edition. So there's a lot of rules in here that just got like overlooked. So if we go over here to Mastering the Wilds, they got their own stuff for discovery and exploration. And I've looked at this, and like it helps determine like the DCs of finding stuff in a hex. This is going to help me out, but it's basically they're trying to boil down the system into a stat block, the way that Paizo likes to do with a lot of things. So, and then they have things like, they reward like exploration points and discovery points, which I'm not really sure what those are for or what they're spent on even. So it's got a great foraging and salvaging system in here that we're gonna take a look at. It's got it says harvesting potions over here, but harvesting poisons. So like I've had a player who like loves to like try to harvest natural stuff. I'm like, oh, we fought the spider, I want to harvest its poison and coat my blade with that, that sort of thing, because the poison system in Pathfinder is kind of strange, at least compared to 5th edition D&D. And then it has all these nice entries for like natural poisons that can be found. So how to create anti-venoms for poisons. So that goes in with like players, surviving out in the wilderness, that sort of thing. So, let's go ahead and put some other things in here. So other ultimate wilderness, and then this also has its own section on hazards and disasters as well, and those could be really useful. It's got some herbalism stuff. Might use the herbalism stuff, might not. It's a cool system. It's a system kind of like alchemy. It's one of those things that if the players want to get into it, then we can add it. But the real big one here is weather. So we used to use Map Tool online for our online games, and I had actually a macro that you put in the beginning stuff, and then it would output whatever it is you needed. So we have some rules for cloud cover, some severe weather events, that sort of thing, that go along with the weather events that are already described in the Pathfinder RPG. So using this, you could you could determine like what's the temperature for that day, and is that temperature enough to cause like an environmental hazard. So like, is it so cold, and that sort of thing. So it'll give you temperatures, it gives you seasonal baselines for a lot of things, dependent on your elevation even. And this is a really, really cool system, and I would like to start using it in the games. Now, how I would actually use this system is that I would probably ignore elevation for the most part in this, and I would roll all of these like, I'd create a like a calendar, and I would roll all of these, and then per day, every day for like 3 months, so I do like one big rolling what the weather is going to be far in advance, so that when the day rolls over to that, I can tell the players what the weather is like. And now the players don't really need to know the exact temperature, because this will give you the exact temperature. The players don't need to know that. However, if that temperature rolls over into it's hot enough to cause, like, needing to make checks to, you know, if it's cold enough to make checks to resist the cold, or if it's so hot to make checks to, resist getting like heat stroke and that sort of thing, which is another thing that Pathfinder has. So this all rolls really well into the focus on exploration and survival in the early stages. So we've got that weather system, food and water. Environmental hazards is going to be the difficult one, because I'm going to have to check a bunch of like a bunch of stuff, and these are probably mostly going to be placed. So like maybe there's going to be an area on the campaign map that's like, that has like geothermal springs, or it's geothermally active, kind of like Yellowstone National Park is in the United States. By the way, that place is beautiful. Go see it if you can, because like you'll see some awesome stuff. So, plus these rules for fording a river are hidden away in here, and that's really, really good. So like, let's say there's a river in a hex that the party's exploring, and obviously they're going to have to cross that river once or twice to explore the whole hex. So then, then we can make some checks, that sort of thing. So this is just really getting some ideas down, and maybe spotting stuff that stands out, right off the bat. Kind of like the ununified terrain types, and the fact that like the getting lost rules use like, if you move this, to determine what direction they move in for an hour, in a hex crawl, that hour could be like within the same hex. So change that so like it can be seen by the players a little bit. Anyways, so that's going kind of like through my thought processes in starting to get this together, and perhaps next time we're going to start looking at like what these rule sets really start to look like when we start putting them together. Anyways, thank you for watching. This is Sarkuris, signing off.